Dear ladies and gentlemen, at first I have to apologize because of my presence. You were expecting Herr Tusek to be here, but unfortunately he had an operation, so he couldn't be in, and I am just his replacement. I have to lead you through this meeting, so I really apologize, but I can tell all of you that he is now much better. He's already in rehabilitation, and he will come back in full force as we know him in the next meeting, middle of November. Now, I have been asked to lead you to make an introduction about the elements which we are discussing here, and the elements are basically about the Austrian economic development in relation to the emerging markets, United States, and so on. So we will try to use TGV, a high-speed train, to keep you into the substance of our discussion. Now, if you look about the economic scenario we are now, we are just slowly, very slowly getting out of a quite unprecedented deep recession. Economists were trying to compare it to the 29 to 30. It is quite similar. It was minus around 4.7. So the worst was last year. And now we're slowly coming up. There was talk about a double dip, which the Americans are still very much concerned. It didn't really happen in the European Union because of the massive Keynesian interventions by all the member states. The same did the United States, but if you look again to the United States, here the effect on unemployment are still so big that they're now looking for a new, what they call quantitative easing number 2. So we are now at the end of the black line. The financial markets are slowly catching up, and the mood is getting better. But if you look at it, we are still way below what the productivity and the consumption was around 3 years ago. So we are just getting out of the hole which we have been all suffering very much. Now, this was a very serious thing, and without the big state intervention, we would have had a much deeper crisis, a much longer crisis, and especially we would have something in Europe similar to the 1930s, where each member state was trying to get his own way, own devaluation, exporting against the others, beggar the neighbor effect. Now, this was not in such a way, because in times of crisis, this time we had all institutions, the heads of states always meeting together in Brussels, and the same happened with IMF, where the meeting together brought more action together, and not the same thing which happened in the 1930s, that everybody was playing his own game, beggar the neighbor, and which then was leading to a resurgence of nationalist scenario, and basically you can also calculate from the 1930s to the stronger feeling of the Nazis, strong inflation and the crisis in 1930, what actually ended after the Second World War. Now, this time, if you compare this, we got all hurt, difficult, but I think we are getting out of this deep and serious crisis faster. If you look, for example, here we had the production volumina between the United States and the European Union of the 27. Now here is interesting, the lower one is the US and the higher one is the European Union. But if you compare, the European Union has now 500 million inhabitants after the enlargement of 2004, whereas the United States represents 300 million inhabitants. So still, that means that the productivity in the European Union is always lower, and this has been the motivation for the Lisbon idea. So here you see that United States productivity suffered even heavier in the lack of demand. Now, if we go more in the whole production, if you compare the European Union to China, and here is something very interesting. You see that the European Union, the production volumina is flat, but China is going up. So, well, the United States has, as we all know from the newspapers, asked for a revaluation of China at least of 20% in the currency, whereas if you look at the famous McDonald index by the economists, you could say that the Chinese currency is overvalued by 40%. If they would increase the currency by 40%, this would lead to more or less a balanced export-import trade in the United States to China, but this is, we all know, not going to happen. So the pressure is on China to revalue the currency. The biggest pressure will take place on the 11th of November when you have the G20 meeting in South Korea, and here everything is trying to be motivated, that kind of China bashing. You see all the reactions in the newspaper. Now, if you look at this China renminbi and US dollar problem, you know that the Chinese government has bought over the years something like a little bit more than 1,000 billion US dollar in treasuries, which means if the Chinese revalue, they will lose. Now they have a value around 2.4%, but this, which is investment US currency, loses around 5%. The other thing is also that if the Chinese go up very fast revaluation, this would lead to cutting down of these Chinese exports, and the Chinese are very scared that they will have very high unemployment inside of China, where they produce from the toys which we all buy for Christmas to the shirts which everybody here in this room has, more or less. Now, this could also lead to unrest in China, and is the reason why you also see the Chinese very, very reluctant to follow up. But basically, the production volumina are as they are, and they're not really going to fall back as you see. One of the reasons is, if you look at the working hours. If you look, the first one, you have the French. They work 1,607 hours a year. And you all have on television the main famous pictures that they complain that they can only go retired at 62 hours, and strikes all over France. Austria, we are a little bit working, a little bit more, but again, even to the Scandinavian comparison, we are working less. Why? Because the Austrians, well, when the French have the 35 hours a week, but the Austrians, we work a little bit more. However, we have also more holidays per year. Now, Sweden and even Italians, you see, they all work more, and our neighbor, the Czech Republic, also 1,800. Now, if you go all the way, also our other neighbor, the Swiss, work more than the Austrians, Hungarian work more than the Austrians, and if you look to the United States, they work around 2,000 hours per year, which is considerably more. But if you then go to South Korea, there you see that per year the average working hours is much higher, 2,305. Now you see that this is also one of the difference about the productivity with the emerging markets. They just work longer. Perhaps sometimes not as efficient as we will, but at the end they work much lower. I was 8 years Austria's permanent representative in Brussels. Each time when I ordered something from France, and they said, all right, somebody took your order in the morning, that's another, I'm the afternoon shift. They were not handing over the task. So this is one of the problems, the 35 hours a week, and this is what the French call delocalisation. It is an effect also of the 35 hours. Now, if you look at the growth figures, Here you see that the area, Eurozone, has around 2010 it grows to 1.2%. Japan is 3%. Poland is the one of the new member states which did best also in the crisis, has a growth rate of 3.1. United States, also they are in difficulties, but this nevertheless should have around 3.2%. But now we go to the emerging markets, which is our subject. There you see that South Africa 3.3, Russia 5.5, Indonesia 6% growth rate, Brasilia, then you have the BRICS, Brasilia, Russia, India and China, all have nearly double or 3 times as big growth rates than we have. So this is one of the motivations which we discussed today, the growth rates in the BRICS. And again, China, 11%. They say this is too much. We should go more on environment-conscious growth. They may go down to 9%. But then you have the big growth rates, especially in Vietnam. You see, China has always a bigger growth rate than India. And these are the two big competitors. The Chinese population will probably increase to the year 2050 from 1.3 billion to around 1.5, but then it will go down because of the one-child policy, and India will move up. This is the demographic predictions, and you should know that demographic predictions are more precise than economic predictions, because all the children who will have, when they're grown up, their own children are already born now. So it's much easier to calculate demographic developments than if you would calculate economic developments, because you still have quite some insecure. Now, if you look at the scenarios, the growth scenario, I was 2 weeks ago, 1 week in Washington, where we together with President Sorge, we went through Federal Reserve Board and trade and all of these, and also the US think tanks, which are always excellent, good information. Now, they were the first time quite depressed. I never saw our American friends so depressed about, because they know they have to do really substantially reform the whole system, infrastructure, and they were also depressed because while Obama says we have to double the exports, but if you want to double the export, how you double? The United States doesn't export a lot of things. Well, they have the planes, they have the military exports, they have agriculture export, but they don't have enough engineers to export. You always look at MIT, but basically all the Austrian companies which we saw in the United States complained they would like to have more engineers, US engineers, because they have to talk to the US administration. Companies like Frequentis, they have to have Americans talking to the Americans, because it's a very security conscious element. They don't find enough engineers in the United States, because to be an engineer in the United States is not as considered as if you have an MBA and you go to Wall Street. Now Wall Street is also quite depressed. Now, so you see, they will go down in BIP, and they don't continue. The predictions to 2019 should be minus around 5% to what they should be expecting before. So if you look at the scenarios for the European Union, the same thing. The crisis brought us really down, and this is again what I tried to explain you. The prediction of economists are more vague than the predictions of the demographic predictions. Actually, they should be around minus 9.3. One of the reasons is the European Union does not tackle all those reforms which you should have according to the Lisbon agenda. So, but if you go on to see our BRIC countries, you have here the growth scenario of China. You see actually the crisis didn't